listening to Working in Oncology, a podcast and video show that spotlights oncology practice staff and industry influencers who work behind the scenes to shape the future of oncology. The more knowledge the oncology community shares with each other, the more we all grow. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to Working in Oncology. I'm Scott Cothran with BioPlus Specialty Pharmacy, and today my guest is Allie Anders, who's a Dispensary Manager with Carolina Oncology Specialists in Hickory, North Carolina. How are you?
Doing good.
Very good. So today we're going to be talking about working in oncology, obviously, our catchy title, but more specifically about your role and what you do on a daily basis, and maybe some changes and some things that might be impacting your job or your industry or how you interact with patients. But before we dig into the technical stuff, so for our listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know the answer to this, so I'm cheating, but you can tell me something that has recently happened to you that's very exciting.
So about me, I have worked in pharmacy for 16 years. Started out in retail, I've worked in hospital, IV mixing primarily, then switched over to retail again, because everybody knows you can always get a job in retail. Doesn't mean you'll enjoy it, but you can always get one. And then I came back to community oncology, actually for the first time, just by chance, because a person I work with at the hospital was working in it. And yeah, so here I am, loving it 3 years later in the community oncology setting. And most recently, I had a baby. This is number 3.
Yay.
There that is. So I'm not busy at all. Not busy at
So
all.
no, new mom life is easy and calm, right? No worries.
It's very peaceful. Very peaceful.
Yeah. So work is probably your great escape, and then you get to have all the fun when you get home at night, right, or in the mornings.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
No.
My boots hit the ground and they don't stop till I don't know, whenever everything's done.
That's a 24/7 job. Well, that's awesome, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So you mentioned your path to pharmacy. Tell me a little bit, and our listeners a little bit, about your specific role, your daily specific role at Carolina Oncology Specialists.
First of all, just blessed to get to work here. Myself and I have a coworker, Melissa, our jobs are to just ensure from start to finish that our patients have access to their oral medications. And also sometimes that includes shots, but primarily oral medications from start to finish. So we do everything from when the doctor prescribes it to when it's actually in the patient's hands. We don't clear out anything from our queue until we know it's in the patient's hands. Sometimes we fill medications in office, in-house, in our dispensary, or we will ship them out to, or send them out to specialty pharmacies, just depending on insurance and so many factors, as anybody that works in pharmacy knows.
Right. Well, you mentioned access, and that leads to a separate topic that I think is relevant every day, and certainly with what you do with patients. So as far as access goes, what are your biggest challenges that you see on a daily basis around access, whether it's cost or insurance, or, just speak to your personal experience?
I think the biggest, in my opinion and experience, the biggest problem for our patients, number one, is the falsehood that they can't get access. I did not realize until recently in other areas and other practices I've spoken with, just depending on where they're at, because we are in a mountainous community. We're not a big city, and most of the places around us are not either. So I have had patients tell me, I just didn't think I'd be able to take it, so I'm just not going to. And it's just a sad issue, because we know that there's help out there, and most of the time, especially because we're under the poverty level here, most patients can have access to these medications for free or very reduced price, but they have no idea. It's like growing up, the best advice I heard my grandfather and my father teaching me, don't ever assume someone knows how to get access to this if they don't even have access to get the access. So
Sure.
That's our jobs, to show them that there is help and they can get it, and we can lead them and guide them to do it. But I think that's
I think you're right. I think that's great, especially considering you're unique. I think geographically, you mentioned, being below the poverty level, very mountainous area, and there's some challenges financially. What obstacles tend to get in your way as far as access? Dealing maybe with manufacturers or insurance plans, or what do you find is most challenging to get that financial assistance?
Insurance definitely is the first step. So when we go to fill a medication or try to fill a medication for a patient, we know that almost every drug our prescribers prescribe, it's usually going to require prior authorization. Now, when I didn't work on this side of pharmacy, I always thought, man, why aren't those doctors' offices hurrying up on these prior authorizations? And even more so now, I know that some people may feel the opposite, but if you have someone dedicated to doing that, there's no reason patients should be waiting weeks to start their medications. One of my physician's office says 14 days automatically. That's ridiculous. I can get prior authorizations overturned in 24 hours or sometimes 2 hours. So that's a big access issue, because if you don't have someone willing to fight or advocate for you and you don't know how to do it, then you're going to go without meds. And these are people who have extreme diagnoses right off the bat. So they need it as soon as possible. So I think that's a big issue. But the insurance is the biggest obstacle in that case, but we've learned to overcome them because we know how to get around things. But secondly, I think, I don't know, we've become good with our drug reps and our manufacturers. Most are good about giving us samples or vouchers for a 30-day free start. So that helps our patients. But the biggest issue really that throws a kink in our plans always is the insurance, truthfully.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. And we certainly hear that a good bit. And I think that's just part of the overall landscape. It's something that's inescapable. What type of tips or what type of tricks maybe have you come up with in working with these patients on a daily basis, to maybe improve your workflow, or maybe improve, like you mentioned, speeding things up? What do you do that maybe some of our listeners might be interested in that would be a helpful hint around PAs or speeding up the process?
Well, in our practice, when I came here, there had been one other person here before me, and she was a pharmacy tech also, but it was very new, and she was kind of overwhelmed, and she did her best. I mean, she did a great job, but her passion was elsewhere. And when I came in, I learned what I could from that. And then looking on, I saw that our nurses who work in our infusion center here were literally doing the prior authorizations for oral meds. They were sending in refills. They were doing everything to do with, I was like, well, why am I here? Because, they were doing everything that I could be doing. I think having a dedicated team if you work in a specialty practice in oncology, you need someone in your practice dedicated to solely getting these medications in patients' hands. You can add other duties to those. And before our practice started picking up and becoming busier and busier in the dispensary, I did have other duties and other forms in our practice. But we knew that someone needed to be dedicated to getting these drugs into the patient's hands, because there's no sense in the follow-up if they haven't even started the medicine. So I think that's the biggest thing, is making sure there's a team or one person starting out dedicated to ensuring the patient has, their medicine. But within saying that, they also, drug reps, I know some people like to get off and say they don't help and, oh, they're annoying me. My drug reps are fantastic. Mm-hmm. They are the reason I can have access to what I do. They keep me sampled up. They keep me vouchered up. I mean, without having those samples and vouchers, when I first started, my doctors would come to me and say, for instance, Promacta for ITP, hematology drug. They would come up and say, this patient's platelets are in the tank. I need it right now. And I would say, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get the insurance to approve that. I'm going to have to do this. Well, Promacta has a voucher for a free 30-day supply. I can order the med, have it in the next day. We do not personally keep these drugs in stock because, as everyone knows, they're $20,000, $14,000. It just depends. But we can have it the next day. That's usually good enough for my doctors, my physicians. Now, everyone's different. Some people's physicians may want to have things in stock. We keep certain things in stock, But a $14,000 drug, we're not just going to keep sitting on a shelf. So we use the vouchers to our advantage to have the meds in the next day. We also keep the samples for if the next day is not good enough. So I think knowing your drugs, knowing what have samples and vouchers, that's really a big benefit to being able to help your patients ASAP. Then you have time you have a couple of days to work on the insurance portion.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And, you bring up another interesting point. What's the communication like between yourself and the physicians? You mentioned just now the situation where they've got, patients' platelets that are at risk and you need something now. Describe your direct communication with physicians in your practice?
I'm very blessed, first of all. Like, I have 3 physicians here and we have 14 mid-levels. We do things a little bit differently. Every time we go to meetings, everyone raises their eyebrows as if to say, why would you meet so many mid-levels? Well, our physicians know the cases, but they go in the rooms with the mid-levels, but they've already reviewed a case. The mid-level also reviews their case. And so therefore, when they go in, they've already discussed, and so they get filled in on the little things that may have happened in between the visits. The doctor knows gets the whole picture, plus the things the patient might forget to tell the physician when they walk in the room. Mid-level goes in first, comes get the doc goes back in. As soon as they need, if they're going to prescribe medication, they usually message me directly from the room. Now, usually the mid-level does that because we try to get our physicians in and out to the next room. So they'll message me from their room, say, hey, I want to do a new start on Revlimid. And I'll say, okay, I'm going to need to see that patient. And they'll say, okay, anything else you need from me right now? And I'm like, no, just send them by our window whenever you're done. And so, of course, there's things I need the doctor to sign off on too with certain drugs. So there's very open communication. If you want to have a dispensary in your practice, excuse me, or even prescribe these type of medications, there has to be open communication between the physicians and the practitioners you work with, or it's not going to work. I have a very good relationship with every single one of them, and they're fantastic.
Well, I could certainly attest to that, knowing how hard you work and how connected you are to everybody there. And I know you're so vital to the overall function of that practice. Talk to me a little bit about your patient interactions. And I know how passionate you are about patients. Tell me your general interaction with them and what that looks like, and some of your different aspects around the patient care, maybe be it counseling or logistics, anything that falls in line with that.
So we're blessed that our window to our dispensary is a little 2-door window. It's probably like a 5-foot wide office. Melissa and I definitely couldn't be 6 feet apart in the pandemic. However, we're right face to face with patients. So when they're in the lobby waiting, they have access to come ask us questions. They have access to come say, hey, I just had a man 5 minutes ago say, hey, the pharmacy hasn't called me about my Pomalyst. Can you help me? And I was able to do that just before jumping on this meeting. I mean, I'm able to they have access to us. And I think that's important. And then, because if a patient feels like, we've all been to doctor's offices where we feel like, I'm having the issue right now, actually, where we feel like, okay, why is no one calling me back? Why is no one being attentive to this small issue in the grand scheme of things, but it's still an issue? So that's our big thing for our patients, is we want them to know we have our own phone line in the dispensary. We have our personal or work emails for them to have access to. And just making sure they know, call us. If this is, when I meet a new patient, I say, anything with oral medications, call me. Just call me off the bat. Now, side effects, or if you're having a reaction, of course, call 911 or call our nurses, but they know to call us if they need things. And then we also, when patients are we have an infusion center, so when patients are getting treatment in that, we will bring their medications to them in their bay they're in. And then if a patient who's switching medications, maybe they've had progression, or maybe they're just having access issues, sometimes the practitioner will message us and tell us, can you come talk to them? The doctor's a little bit behind, so can you go ahead and come talk to them? So it's just, once again, it's really about communication between us all that makes it work.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think that's great advice. And I think that's a great way to do what you're doing. You mentioned being social distance from Melissa. So tell me about how you've been impacted by COVID, and, what did you change or what did you discover during the pandemic that maybe you're like, hey, this is great, or hey, well, let's hope this never happens again. So
yeah,
tell me what happened.
We're fortunate, again, like I can't say enough about the practice I work for. We were fortunate we were already kind of watching COVID from a distance. And I think a lot of places deep down were. We'd already took some precautions before they made it, I had the baby in April. So in March, the weekend, the Black Friday in March, we like to call it, when they kind of came down on all of us, we already were prepared in a sense. No one could fully prepare, I don't think. But we were already prepared for some changes to roll in. Now, once again, we're privately affiliated, so we're very fortunate that we don't work for, we definitely follow standards, but we were able to make some calls on our own, So we were able to go ahead and order things, and I'd already stocked up on breathing treatments and, just different things that we knew we may need. So that was an impact, just trying to brace for the unknown, and our patients getting chemo and already having no immune system, we had to do some radical things. Like we have a treatment curb area now. But COVID has impacted us in good ways too. We now have a fast track for labs. We didn't have that before. Everybody was mucked all together. Now, if you're just needing lab work and that's it, and you're not needing to stay for results, we have a fast track area now where patients come in and they can check in and they go get their labs and they leave. And it takes sometimes just 15 minutes, 10 minutes. So COVID, we try to find the good in COVID. Because we didn't want a lot of people in our lobby. We have a rather large lobby, but we didn't want them all out there. So
and that makes perfect sense. So what will you continue to do that you discovered still post-COVID? Like you mentioned, the fast track labs, but I'm assuming you'll continue that, or will that change, or is there anything else that you'll keep taking on?
We're gonna even have a new area for it. We're gonna have a new fast track area. We're gonna we've actually been able to hire some new people. We're gonna have a new we're gonna rearrange the front desk staff, so there's always gonna be like a concierge kind of person at the front to help patients direct them where they need to go and check them in, so that our front desk staff is not as overbogged when they're scheduling MRIs, CTs, and all these kinds of things. It's definitely opened our eyes to some things that you can even do better. So we try to look at COVID, and I do, in a positive way. But look how this benefited us, instead of look at all this junk we're having to do that maybe we don't even know if it's helping, because there are some unknowns still with COVID, but we try to focus on that fact. And then as far as in the dispensary, there are certain drugs and certain antibiotics that it's scary to think about not being able to get. So for our patients, especially who just sometimes need to take it because they have like no white count. So we are definitely keeping things in stock that before we kind of were like, oh, we can just order it if we need it. Now we're a little bit more cautious to keep those in stock, especially if it's a drug we know is going to affect their white count.
Right. That's interesting. Well, you've got fantastic optimism coming out of COVID, and it's always interesting that sometimes trials and struggles end up open up new avenues and new things that hopefully make you and the patient's life easier. What type of resources or tools do you use in your daily activities? Do you have like a source that you tap industry wide, or like a dispensary publication or community group, or anything that maybe makes your job a little easier, or that you glean helpful hints from?
Well, you guys help me a lot, that. But I also use the drug reps, like I said before, too. There were 3 new drugs that came out in the past week, a week from today backwards. So 2 were for really RET fusion drugs, and then I can't even think of what the other one was right now. But 2 lung drugs, and another one I think was for my lung AML. Anyway, I immediately called the drug reps for those companies that I have good. I said, hey, I know it just got approved today, but I need to go. I've got patients. The doctor's already told me I need. I told them I need to know more about this. So they go ahead and they let me know. So that's a really big helpful thing for me. And then Smart ID Works is who we use to help manage our dispensary. Have you ever heard of them?
Not familiar with them. No, you can feel free to expand on that.
So we use QS1 for our operating system for our dispensary, which is where we fill the prescriptions through and everything like that and process claims. So Smart ID Works is the side of QS1 that, like, if I have a claim I didn't get paid on, I call Smart ID Works. If I need to get a doctor's license put into my system, I call Smart ID Works. If I just anything, I just call it. They're fantastic. Can't speak enough about them. Small company, but great rewards. I personally, like, they know my kids' names. It's awesome. But they also, I talk too much, so that's why they know my kids' names. But they really care about seeing us thrive. So they make sure we are up to date on everything we need to be, and, run according to state law, and can't speak enough about them. And then, like, clinically, we use UpToDate a lot. I use Hippocrates a lot. Those two for interaction checks and things like that. And in general, my physicians, we're very lucky to work where we work, and then we have good contacts with, Baptists and things like that. So we're fortunate to have, if we have questions, we have good resources, I guess is the point. But I can't stress enough having a good app like Hippocrates or UpToDate to go by, because just the knowledge that's on those apps are important.
Well, that's great information. I hope some of our audience and listeners, that's something maybe they've heard for the first time. So appreciate you sharing that. So what do you have? Are you working on any current projects, or what's the future look like for your role? Just status quo, or anything coming down the pipeline regarding the practice? Or
doesn't everyone want to say? It depends on what happens with these insurance companies. Obviously, with the new year coming, I don't choose to let it stress me out, the DIR fees, and we could have a whole segment on that. But I choose not to let it bother me. Instead, I try to keep searching for ways to fight them. They are doing borderline. It really should be illegal. There's just loopholes. So instead, how about legislation closes those loopholes for them? But that's another topic for another day. But we keep trying to ensure that we keep a really tight eye on our billing and everything like that. So we really try not to take too high of a risk, because sometimes high risk is not high return in pharmacy. So we really, and that's, like I said, that's where my specialty pharmacies help me. But we're going to expand our dispensary, hopefully a little bit, make a bigger area and better access for patients, because some of our patients, they can't stand, and they can't necessarily stand outside my window. So we're going to have a different area for them to be able to sit and discuss with us when we're going over new patient starts on new meds. And then, as far as oncology as a whole, what's coming for the future, I hope good things. I hope, I always hope for good things. I said this week, if we could create a cure for the allergy, cough, and neuropathy, we'd never have to work again, So,
right.
But I really like the 3 drugs that have came out in the past week. I'm really hoping are going to help these people that are like family to us. There's too many reoccurrences, and there's when you work in it, you're like, okay, I swear there's more cancer this week, I swear. But it's going to always be that way, because that's why we're here. Yeah. So I'm really excited to see these new drugs coming out, and I want access to a broader span of pharmacies, because some people that get access really, in my opinion, shouldn't have it. So I would love to see better pharmacies get access to these drugs. I advocate for that all the time. I'm like, why are you giving your business to this pharmacy? Come on. Let it be one that has great customer service, please.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Allie, that's been so informative today, and I really appreciate your time. And if some of our listeners want to follow up with you, what would be a good way for them to contact you, if they want to follow back on something you said today and get some more info from you?
Oh, email. The lovely email. Anytime. I don't mind. I think that the biggest thing about oncology is making sure that we have to work as a team to get to the main goal, which is giving the patient the best quality of life and care possible. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, they can email me at my work email, which is Anders, So it's AANDERS at oncology-cos.com. And anybody's welcome to reach out and if they have any questions, and vice versa, if they need to teach me something, I'm always open to learning new things because it's definitely an ever-evolving situation in oncology.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that information. And I think you're right. Oncology is so dynamic and it's changing every day. And I think, like with this podcast and some of the communities with everybody being able to connect and network, I think we all benefit from that, especially keeping the patient as our focus. So we will leave it at that. And I want to thank again, Allie Anders, for joining us today at Carolina Oncology Specialists in Hickory, North Carolina, who is the Dispensing Manager. And again, this is Scott Cothran with BioPlus Specialty Pharmacy. And thank you for listening to Working in Oncology podcast. Thank you, Allie, so much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, you too.
Are you satisfied with your patient's current speed to therapy? Or are you just settling? You can improve patient outcomes with BioPlus Specialty Pharmacy's Power of Two, the first ever 2-hour, 2-day, together promise. It's faster and easier for you and your patients. To learn more, visit bioplusrx.com.
You've been listening to Working in Oncology. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to leave a quick rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.